platformers, RPGs, action-adventures, puzzlers, racers, 3D flight. It's no surprise that the Super Nintendo Entertainment System continues to be a popular pick for many people's favorite console of all time. Developers took what worked on 8-bit consoles and injected new color and more spectacle. The 16-bit era gave us an early look at 3D gaming on home consoles, while 2D game design was arguably perfected. Thankfully, the Super Nintendo is actually one of the most versatile consoles in terms of video output, but not everything is cut and dry. Let's talk about what you can do to get the best picture out of your SNES. Welcome to RGB204.
Running off the success of the Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo entered the 16-bit race a little bit later than its competitors, releasing the Super Famicom in Japan in late 1990, and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in North America in the summer of 1991. The SNES was later released in PAL regions the following year. The console generally outputs a 240p signal, rendering at 256 by 224, or 256 by 239, though there are also rare instances of games running in 480i. The SNES supports several distinct graphical modes, numbered 0 through 7, which describes how many layers make up the image, as well as how many colors each layer supports. The 7th mode, famously called Mode 7, is the Super Nintendo's signature graphical feature, allowing for the scaling, tilting, and rotation of a background layer. This mode is the key to the system's ability to create convincing 3D perspectives, used in all kinds of games. Nintendo would also significantly expand the SNES's capabilities by embedding special processing chips inside the game cartridges, like the Super FX chip, which allows for mind-blowing 3D graphics using polygons that wasn't possible for the direct competition. Like just about every other console that hit the market up through the mid-90s, the Super NES shipped with an RF switch for audio and video output. The coaxial cable screws into an input on the back of your television and connects to the SNES through a dedicated port on the back of the system. While simple and convenient, we're sure you know by now that this is far from ideal, especially with modern displays. The SNES introduced the now familiar Nintendo AV multi-out port, which would be used for several console generations to come. With a standard set of common and easy to find AV cables, composite video and stereo sound is readily available. But that's not all. This single proprietary port is wired up for so much more. Now, I'd always known of the existence of S-Video, but I never owned a TV that supported it. So when Tri told me that he'd been using S-Video for years, I had to give it a shot. Seeing that Yoshi's Island title screen pop up on screen from my old SNES and S-Video was perhaps the first step on my search for optimal image quality. By separating color and brightness information into two separate wires within the cable, the blurriness and crawly edges associated with composite video is significantly improved. So much so that I'd say that composite to S-Video is perhaps the biggest jump in quality in the world of analog video. For the longest time, we thought that S-Video was the ultimate solution for Super Nintendo video quality. But unfortunately, TV manufacturers stopped supporting it years ago. As we started to research video scalers and discovered the XRGB-Mini Framemeister, we learned that the Super Nintendo natively supports RGB video.
Of course, we've never been able to use RGB directly with our TV sets in North America. But in spite of this, all units of the larger original models of SNES and Super Famicom worldwide are built to support RGB video without any modifications. While not quite as stunning as going from composite to S-Video, there is definitely a noticeable jump in quality. Colors seem more natural and the image is overall very clean. But sometimes you might find yourself with a nagging feeling that the Super Nintendo's RGB image is kinda disappointing. let's take a look at the Super Nintendo's most famous rival, which also natively supports RGB. Sure, the SNES can show off more colors than the Genesis, but when you put them side by side, you'll notice a softer image coming from the Super NES. While it still looks pretty great, you might wish it could be a lot better. The good news is that you can get sharper RGB video out of a Super Nintendo. The bad news is that you might have to buy another Super Nintendo. As we've mentioned on the show before, consoles typically go through many internal revisions, even if on the outside they look pretty similar. Much later in the Super Nintendo's life, Nintendo consolidated the processing chips on the motherboard and released what are referred to as one-chip consoles, which just so happen to have considerably sharper video quality than previous revisions. These systems shouldn't have the infamous yellowing effect on the body of the console, but that is by no means a sure indicator of a one-chip console. Mine was bought in late 1994 and still has softer video output. RetroRGB.com says that the only way to be sure if a console is a one-chip unit is to open it up, but a system with a serial number beginning with UN3 is a pretty safe bet. There are several revisions of the one chip. The final revision is said to be sharper than the others, but doesn't support C-Sync, the cleanest sync method for RGB video. Luckily, this can be fixed through modification. It's worth noting that one-chip performance isn't 100% accurate to older models. You could even argue that the radically revamped internal design makes it almost like an official sort of clone system. While most games perform exactly as you would expect, forum threads around the internet have documented a handful of discrepancies between how certain games run on one-chip consoles versus pre-one-chip consoles. Most of these differences or glitches are practically a non-issue, but it's a choice between 100% accurate game processing versus razor-sharp graphics. There's also the matter of the redesigned Super Nintendo. This so-called SNES Mini or SNES Junior is basically another one-chip revision, but there's a critical flaw. Despite its use of the same AV out port, S-Video and RGB just don't work. The SNES Mini supports composite video only, not even RF. You might think that this means it's the worst option for a Super Nintendo, but it's actually possible to restore RGB output to the AV multi-out through what I understand is a relatively simple modification. And most importantly, this is generally considered to be the sharpest output of any SNES model. Here's my childhood SNES from 1994, Coury's second revision one chip, and my RGB modded SNES Mini, all run through the Framemeister with the exact same scaler settings. Think there's a difference? Now let's add the one chip revision 3 to the mix, generally considered to be slightly sharper than the other one chip units. We'll let you be the judge. One last quirk to note. On dark colors, you might notice a pair of faint vertical lines in the center of the image. As far as we know, this is an issue on all SNES and Super Famicom consoles. However, we find that the issue is largely resolved by using RGB. The Final Fantasy VI opening is one of the best scenes for checking the vertical lines. Wes Almond of Retro Fixes installed a THS7314 RGB bypass amp in my SNES Mini, and I wouldn't even know it was there if I wasn't looking for it. Check with your modder to find out if they're using the best and newest parts. Of course, piracy aside, there are several alternatives to the real thing, such as clone systems like the Retro Duo, many of which support S-Video output for SNES games. But they can have compatibility issues, and the end result is unlikely to beat the real thing. The Retron 5 outputs a fairly crisp 720p image over HDMI, but we prefer the look of RGB through the Framemeister. Official emulation methods like Nintendo's Virtual Console are actually pretty darn good. Unlike the NES Virtual Console, we like the look of Super Nintendo games on both the Wii and Wii U, with the advantage of 240p analog output over component if you use the original Wii hardware, or pretty decent scaling over HDMI with the Wii U.
So, which console should you buy? Well, there's a lot of trade-offs and a lot to consider. If you like the original design, one-chip consoles all have sharper output, but the third and final one-chip revision doesn't support C-Sync without a mod. However, Sync on Luma cables provide nearly equivalent results. But honestly, you'll probably be equally happy with any one-chip console. Retro RGB tells us that if you install a THS7314 amp and a one-chip 03, the result is equal to a modded Mini equipped with the same part. Either way, you get the best possible image, but this option is more costly due to the rarity of the consoles and the modification required. Because one-chip consoles, including the Mini, do exhibit minor quirks in a small handful of games, maybe you just want to use your childhood SNES, and really, that's a fine option too. If you're considering importing a Super Famicom, we should point out that North American consoles are arguably the most versatile. While North American carts won't fit into a Super Famicom without an adapter, you can play imports on a North American console by simply using pliers and wiggling off the two tabs in the back of the cartridge slot. Whoa, that's easy. When it comes to choosing RGB cables, the Super Nintendo is a bit of a special case. As you may know, SCART and JP21 cables look the same, but the pins are connected to different wires, meaning that they are not compatible with one another. While SCART and JP21 are European and Japanese standards respectively, it's important to note that the cable design has nothing to do with PAL and NTSC video standards. In other words, just because SCART would normally be used in Europe, there's no reason its signal can't work with North American or Japanese video equipment. Because SCART is more readily available, that's what we use in our setups, along with a specially made SCART adapter that we bought for our Framemeisters. For most other consoles, you can just buy a SCART cable and it works with your system regardless of its region. But when it comes to the Super Nintendo, the RGB line in the NTSC and PAL systems operate a bit differently. NTSC systems, Japan and North America in other words, require RGB cables equipped with capacitors, while systems from PAL regions, Europe, Australia, and such use resistors. This means that RGB cables designed for European SNES consoles will not work correctly on North American systems, or vice versa, and certain mismatched configurations can be dangerous to your equipment. However, this doesn't mean that SCART won't work with North American or Japanese consoles. Remember, all SCART means is which piece of the signal ends up at which pin. Cable makers have made unique SCART cables that are different from the ones that would have been sold in Europe for use with the SNES back in the day. So if you want to use SCART in your setup, just pay special attention when buying a cable for your Super Nintendo. It needs to be specifically designed for use with North American or NTSC consoles. When shopping for cables, you might see different sync types. C-Sync, also known as Pure Sync or Clean Sync, is the best option for the cleanest image. Sync on Luma cables are also available. Use these if you own the third one-chip console. Avoid sync on composite cables unless your TV or video equipment requires it. They create a sort of checkerboard pattern in certain colors. In our episode on the Sega Genesis, we mentioned that we've got our hands on the final circuits for HD Retrovision's component cables. This is a method for pulling the RGB signal from your console and converting it to the Y, PB, PR color space, more commonly referred to as component video. By itself, these cables are not an upscaling solution, but we think they're a cost-effective option for people who want a simple way to get a cleaner signal from their console to an HD TV or CRT. And somehow, they're also universal for NTSC and PAL. We've also tried out several all-in-one RGB to component converters, such as these generic all-purpose SCART units, and the Retro Clarity, which includes functionality for multiple consoles.
The Super Nintendo was certainly a powerful console for its time, and is generally very versatile when it comes to almost any type of analog video output. But getting the best can be a challenge. While the RGB video provided by most units is good, but not as good as the competition, you do have some options. But no matter how you play, you're sure to enjoy some of the finest that gaming has ever had to offer.